Was there a way to have avoided all of this? Was there something that someone could have done further upstream to avoid all this chaos that we're seeing now in the Middle East? Like, what was the first domino that fell?
In Iran, you do have an enormously repressive regime that has the ability to take action against their own people in an incredibly brutal way, as we saw it play out in January. And it's also a regime that does not respect the right of Israel to exist. It's also a regime that has been sending weapons and money and military advice to other revolutionary actors around the region, undermining security in Yemen, undermining security in Iraq, undermining security in Syria. So, I mean, the fact that at the core of the Middle East, you have a revolutionary regime that was exporting instability and violence is a serious problem. That's number one. Number two, Israel, America's top ally in the region. America first, but Trump still gives billions of dollars every year to Israel, even as he's cut off military aid and support for almost everyone, including for Ukraine, right? This country is very capable of now attacking all of its enemies and creating outcomes that it wants, whether or not it creates instability in those countries. We've seen that in Gaza and the West Bank, right? I mean, reality is Israel is continuing to take more and more territory in the West Bank, and no one can do anything about it. They hit Lebanon really hard. No one can respond to that. So that is creating a reality where Israel is able to determine outcomes and even attack Iran directly with the United States. They felt very confident about taking that on and that there would not be backlash that would undermine Israel's own political survival. It wasn't an existential risk to Israel. And even if Iran developed nukes, which is everyone wants to prevent from happening, but Israel has their own nukes, right? I mean, they have like 100 plus. So those are two fundamental drivers of conflict and instability in the region. One aligned with the United States, one a revolutionary theocracy. There have been very positive developments in this region, very positive developments. First of all, Syria. Assad was a brutal dictator that was overthrown by his own people, and his own military would not support and fight for him. And the Russians proved that they couldn't support him in a significant way. And so now you have an opportunity for Syria to become a representative government that can engage with others around the region and more broadly. That's a positive. You've got Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Qatar that are engaging in transformative domestic policies to attract investment from all over the world, to build experiences that everyone would want to travel and engage in, to create work opportunities that are far better remunerated than anything that foreign labor could get in their own home countries, allowing them to bring money home. And in the case of Saudi Arabia specifically, they're taking 35 million people. Half of that economy used to be closed to women, and now they're bringing women into the economy. They're actually not just educating them, but they're giving them opportunities in every area of employment. That is one of the most extraordinary stories in the world today in terms of change in governance, and that continues. Then final point here is that in the context of this Iran war, and in the context of a United States, which is doing less global leadership, there are questions of how these countries that are aligned with the US want to ensure their own futures. And so we see increasingly two different blocs that are starting to form. You've got the United Arab Emirates together with Israel. You remember the Abraham Accords, which was Trump's big foreign policy success in his first term, where he got these countries, the UAE and others, to recognize Israel and start doing a lot more tourism and, business and technology transfers and the rest. So UAE, Israel, the United States, and India are increasingly aligning on national security and technology. And they're becoming more of an international bloc based on this region. At the same time, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, long worked together on defense, are now much more public about an alliance. Pakistan is nuclear, Saudi Arabia is not, but Pakistan would provide them nuclear weapons if they really wanted it. That's absolutely something to think about. They are increasingly becoming a regional defense quad, 4 countries, together with Turkey and Egypt. big countries, big populations aligning more diplomatically and on defense, calling for a regional security architecture in the region, but that would not be easily aligned with the UAE, America, Israel, and with India. So that is also a significant tension. And in the context of all of that, 95 million people in Iran, whose military has been substantially degraded, whose economy and industry have been substantially degraded, and who were already running their economy into the ground before the war happened. These guys aren't winners. They're survivors, right? They have influence over the strait, but they're not winning. And this is dangerous long term.
Your firm makes a lot of predictions. So I wanted to ask you to help me try and look forward as to how this conflict might end. We're in a position now where it seems that the US aren't going to give up the demand to Iran that they cease to develop and pursue nuclear enrichment. It appears that Iran have said that they want the right, and they believe they have the right, they said this before this conflict started, to enrich uranium and to have nuclear power plants and all these kinds of things. So how does this end? Like Trump's now, he's blockaded the Strait of Hormuz. We're in another standoff.
The ceasefire's in place.
The ceasefire's in place, which I think he said was 14 days. And we're now probably, got 9-10 days left of that.
Yeah.
He's thinking a lot about his legacy. He can't be re-elected. He talks sometimes about, winning the Peace Prize and wanting to be on a Mount Rushmore of presidents and all this. So he can't just leave. If he just leaves, then Iran carry on with their enrichment program. It goes down in history, almost like a Bush failure, geopolitical failure. He can't just leave. He has to be seen to win. But also Iran can't let him be seen to win. So what happens?
I think unlike almost anybody else you can imagine, if he decided that he wanted to end this, he could end this. He could just leave and he would say, I won. He's already said this in different ways. It's, I don't even care about the nukes because we've already entombed them. They're under all this rubble. We've got satellite coverage. If the Iranians try to get at them, we can hit them back. He's already said that there's already a regime change. It's already new people. We can work, we can talk with these people. He already said the strait isn't his problem, right? But of course, he's also said different things, sometimes in the same tweet, right? So he's picking and choosing. But what I'm suggesting to you is that Trump has already moved towards de-escalation.
You're spot on when you say he's set the stage to back out. We won, regime change, the strait's not my problem. We have our own oil, blah, 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 blah. But then, if you don't open that strait, I'm going to end civilization.
Yeah.
So which didn't seem to fit. It seemed like he was setting the stage to back out, and then suddenly the civilization tweet, I'm going to bomb your bridges and your nuclear power plants, which suddenly made me think, okay, so maybe he does really care about
and wasn't plausible, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no chance that he was actually going to do all that evening.
So why didn't he just back out?
Well, I do not want to be Trump's psychologist. Right? It is very clear that he is impulsive and that he does not have much impulse control, nor does he create around him mechanisms that create impulse control, that enforce impulse control. He's on his phone all the time. He watches the media relentlessly. People engage with him from all over the world on his cell phone, and he has recency bias. The thing he heard and saw last, he frequently focuses on.
But he also watches the markets.
Yes.
He seems obsessed with the stock market.
That's why so many of the announcements he makes are right before or right after the market opens. And obviously there's been a lot of insider trading concerns around that too. And he's concerned about personal enrichment and people around him making billions of dollars. That plays in too. I wish it didn't. It's horrible to talk about it, but you can't avoid that topic. What happens? You want to know what happens? I don't have a crystal ball. No one does. But where I think this could be going on the basis of that, the most likely outcome is that the ceasefire is eventually extended, that we have those talks that were 21 hours that were substantive. There'll be more talks, maybe not with the vice president, but there'll be more talks. They'll become more substantive. And that eventually I expect that the Iranians are more likely to give on the nuclear issue and on enrichment if they're able to maintain a privileged position on transit through the strait, because that will help provide them with money and with security. They get a level of deterrence if everybody knows these guys could shut down the strait in the future. That helps them. They never had nukes. They weren't going to get nukes. If they got nukes, they were going to get blown up. Like everyone knew that. They were 2 weeks away if they had access to the material and they reprocessed it nuclear grade and they weren't stopped by the Americans or the Israelis. That's a lot of if-ands, right? So, but here, they've got influence over the strait. They have it. They've used it. They're using it. They're making money. Trump does not have a military plan to hit them back. So I think that is the most likely outcome. And if that is the case, then over time, the Iranians will cut more deals with more countries to get more oil out. And meanwhile, there will be, after the ceasefire is in place and strong, then the Europeans and other countries, the Indians, other countries will come in and they will start escorting ships to create a more secure environment in the strait itself. That is the good scenario, or it's the less bad scenario, because all of this should have been avoided.
I want to make sure I'm clear on this scenario. You're saying that they'll concede on the nuclear point, Iran potentially?
At least somewhat. I think they will compromise on the nuclear point.
But in turn, they'll get more control over the strait?
Yes.
And what does that mean? That they'll be able to decide who goes through there? They'll get a toll
charge.
Oh, they'll be
able to charge. And by the way, you could define them charging the toll as part of the reconstruction money that they're going to need for the war that they just suffered.
Reparations.
I mean, they'll call it reparations. No one else will call it reparations, but that's fine. I think that is the good scenario. Again, the less bad scenario. And I would say it is more likely than not. There is another scenario, right? And the other scenario is that everything that Trump has been saying is because he doesn't yet have a military plan. Over the last days, with all this ceasefire, there's still this new aircraft strike group that is motoring its way over to the Gulf. You got thousands more American troops that are heading into position, ground troops, right? They're going to have almost 15,000 total that will be deployed by Trump since this war started. They're going to be there in the next 2 weeks. Once Trump has them there, he can use them. And there are lots of things he might use them on. He keeps saying, I keep seeing him go back. Before I was talking about all the ways he was saying, we don't need to defend the strait. We don't need the nuclear, that we can hit them. But he also has been saying, we should take the oil. I've heard him say this on a number of occasions. I've also seen him say, if just the American people were a little more patient, we could take the oil. What does he mean by taking the oil? That's not a blockade. Blockade isn't taking the oil. Blockade is stopping the Iranians from getting the oil out. Take the oil is control the export facility on Karg Island, right? And
can you explain this for anyone that doesn't know what Karg Island is and the significance of it in the oil situation?
This is a comparatively small island. It's about half the size of Manhattan. It's not incredibly fortified or defended. And it's very close to the Iranian shore. And it is responsible for 90% of the export of Iranian oil. CENTCOM, the Central Command, say that you can take Karg Island with 12 to 15,000 men relatively comfortably.
So where is Karg Island on here?
Yeah, so Karg Island is right about here. It's not in the strait itself, but it's right off of the Iranian coast. And we're talking about 90% of Iranian oil export comes out through there. So if the Americans take it, obviously very easy for the Iranians to be engaged in strikes against them, but the Iranians will not be able to get any oil out. So suddenly the Americans have far more leverage over the Iranian economy, right? In a very direct way, in a very targeted way. And that is the way that you take the oil.
Could Trump actually take it out of this region somehow? Is there like another passage through that doesn't involve? Okay, so
no.
He could just stop the oil.
He could stop the oil.
Okay.
But again, if he has control of Karg, the oil coming out of Karg, if you want to bring it to market, the only ones that could do it would then be the Americans. Now, the Iranians at that point could still disrupt the strait. And there are other conversations, there are other military plans about how you might be able to take coastal regions, raids on the territory that would take out more ballistic missile sites, go after their drones. All of this takes more troops. All of this takes more casualties, but would also give you more capacity to eventually enforce a navigable strait with escorts, which right now you can't do. Right now, the Iranians can prevent you from getting any ships out if they wish to. I think that the likelihood that Trump is ultimately going to make that order is well below 50%. I think that the worst scenario is not the more likely one because he understands how unpopular it will be. But it does mean that he's going to have to sell a pretty ugly pig with lipstick on it. It means that. Because this was the problem Trump has is he can't blame anyone else for this.
Yeah.
He's the decider. Like, he did it. I mean, he's got his secretaries in cabinet that are all saying, well, the war, it's up to Trump. He's got the war goals. It'll be over when he says it is. It's all about Trump. He can blame NATO for not wanting to join him. They're joining him. It was his war of choice. And he's never been responsible directly for an economic downturn. I mean, the pandemic wasn't his fault, right? This is an economic downturn with oil prices shooting up. Gas is over $4 a gallon. Diesel's over $5. Inflation's ticking up. Food prices are going up. He's wildly underwater on affordability, and he is completely responsible for it. No one else is responsible.
And zooming out even further, when we think about this on a global scale, you've got Russia, who are at war with Ukraine. That seems to have just completely vanished from the news cycle, by the way.
It has not in Europe, I promise you, but in the United States, they're talking a lot less about it. It's true. In Poland, this is a very big issue. In the Baltics, it is a very big issue.
And then you've got China, who must be laughing because it looks like the United States are just sort of self-harming themselves.
Yep.
And then you've got Europe, which is the last power, who seem to now just be sort of colluding with themselves and getting together and saying, listen, we're not going to help the US anymore. I mean, I grew up through all these little conflicts and wars, and the UK always seemed to come to the US's call. Yeah. And for the first time ever, I'm watching the UK go, actually, no, you do this one yourself.
Not doing this.
I'm going to meet with Macron in France, and we're going to huddle and go it alone. What is that big picture? And which part of that big picture is most pertinent to talk about?
Yeah, China's the most pertinent because it's the most powerful. Russia's the easiest to deal with, which is that for the Russians, they don't have much that they produce that's manufactured. They don't have very good technology, right? They're relying more on the Chinese.
They've got oil there, haven't they?
That they manufacture. They've got oil, they've got gas, they've got fertilizer, right? All the things with the prices have just spiked through the roof. That's what the Russians have. That's where their power is. And so they are making so much more money. Their economy was really getting squeezed with all the sanctions. Now they're getting so much more for everything that they actually sell. And the Americans have reduced sanctions like they did on Iran against Russia because Trump cares about the markets, as you say. So Russia's in a better position for that reason. And they're in a better position because all the weapons the Americans have been selling to the Europeans to get to Ukraine, America now needs to get to the Middle East. So the Ukrainians are going to have a harder time defending their cities against Russian ballistic missiles, against Russian drones. So this clearly means that Putin will be much, much less interested in a ceasefire, which, let's face it, he wasn't really very interested in to begin with. Trump, at the beginning of this term, promised he would end this war. He was hugely frustrated. He goes to Israel to announce the Gaza ceasefire. It's a big win. The Knesset, the Israeli parliament, they're standing ovation. And he's like, I thought I was going to get the Russia war done, and I failed it. I haven't been able to do that. I got this one instead. Like, Trump never brings up his own failures, but this really bothers him. So here you've got yet more ability for the Russians to say, we're going to persist. And it makes it more likely that Trump will eventually do a deal with the Russians over the heads of the Europeans. So that's the Russia issue kind of in a little box. Now, Europe, we already talked about how Europe is having its problems economically. It doesn't have the productivity, it doesn't have the growth.
What did Europe do wrong, in your view? Like, I'm a European, I guess. I was born in Botswana in Africa, but I moved to the UK when I was young. So I guess I'm British. What did the country do wrong? Because the country was so strong and powerful and respected when I was younger. And I love Britain, but it appears on a global stage that perception has changed. The US are talking to us like a lapdog.
Yeah.
At Davos, I saw the talks. They're like, you need to get your shit together and be stronger and stop being so woke, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. Well, first, the Americans talking to the Europeans that way has a lot more to do with the change in administration.
Okay.
I don't think any other Democratic or Republican president would do what Trump is doing to his closest allies. I think that's more unique. But it is certainly true that over the last 30 years, there have been two really big geopolitical shifts, right? The United States has shifted its orientation, but not its geopolitical power. But in terms of power shift, you've got the rise of China and the global South, India in particular after China, but China is the biggest piece of that. And then you have the decline of American allies. Europe, Canada, Japan, South Korea. These are countries, most of which are contracting demographically, right? They're countries, most of which that have much flatter growth and much more reduced productivity than the United States. They've not been investing in their own defense. They've not been investing in their own technology. So what you see is an asymmetry. At the same time that the Americans are saying, we're not interested in the rest of the world, we don't want to do all this stuff, don't want to fight the wars, don't want free trade, you're also seeing a reality where those countries don't bring as much to the table in a conversation with the United States. So the so-called Draghi plan, the 800-page plan by the former central bank head in Europe, the ECB, Mario Draghi, they called him Super Mario. He had this competitiveness report that all of these things that the Europeans needed to do, and he would say the Brits as well, to address that, to build entrepreneurship, to spend in ways that would actually bring a return long-term, to like invest in new technologies, to reduce red tape. The plan is there. But unlike the United States, unlike China, Europe is not a country. Europe is 27 countries in the EU. And the United Kingdom, which decided for Brexit. It's a lot harder when you don't have scale. It's just harder. And when you have elections every, every few years, it's just more challenging. You can't do the sort of stuff that the UAE or the Saudis or the Singaporeans or the Chinese can do at scale long term. So as a consequence, what did Europe do wrong? Europe believed that the world after the wall came down in 1989, after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, they believed that the world was just going to be peaceful, that everyone was going to have a system like the Europeans did, so they didn't need to invest in defense. And it was okay if they didn't invest in lots of technology because they had friends that they could work with, and maybe their growth wouldn't be as big, but their quality of life would be so high. And they were completely wrong. China did not. They got wealthier. But they didn't suddenly align with the United States and Europe. China didn't become a free market economy. China didn't become a democracy. China is a consolidated dictatorship under Xi Jinping with no term limits and with control of the economy, state control of the economy. And that's not an easy environment for the Europeans to be comfortable being non-competitive.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.